Amos Chapman was a man caught between two worlds, part white, part native, and entirely a product of the frontier. As a scout for the U.S. Army during the Red River War, he faced danger that tested every ounce of his endurance and courage. But in 1874, on the windswept plains of Texas, Chapman and 5 others found themselves surrounded by more than 100 Comanche and Kiowa warriors in what became known as the Battle of Buffalo Wallow. Outnumbered, outgunned, and fighting for their lives, their stand became one of the most remarkable survival stories of the Old West. Well, let's get into it, shall we? My name's Steven, and welcome to Wild West Deep Dives. Amos Chapman's early life remains partly obscured by conflicting accounts. Some sources list his birth as the 15th of March, or the 15th of May, of 1837 or 1839. So yeah, it's all over the place. What is clear is that he was a mix of white and Native American ancestry, which would deeply shape his life on the frontier. One early account notes that he came to Oklahoma as a boy, and according to Tina Bailey and Amos Chapman, son of Western Oklahoma, he grew up in the country as it was at that time, leaving family and close ties behind. He had only his conscience as a guide, and only what protection a boy in knee pants could provide himself. Raised between two worlds, Chapman's understanding of both cultures became one of his greatest strengths. As a young man, Chapman made his way across the southern plains, learning the languages, customs, and geography of the region. He spent time trading with the Cheyenne, exchanging calico, beads, and trinkets for buffalo hides. This work made him familiar with the lands that would later define his career and help him earn a reputation as a capable interpreter and frontiersman. Before his Army service, Chapman gained considerable experience as a guide on wagon trains. Frontier Times magazine later described how he led many wagon trains to safety across the wilderness before being employed by the Army at Camp Supply. In the diary of Mrs. Edna Thomas, who traveled in the Biggers wagon train under Chapman's escort, she wrote that he was remembered as a quiet man and, fortunately for us, not a drunkard. When 2 families became separated during a dust storm and were captured by 4 Indians, Chapman rode after them, shot one of the attackers, and rescued the families despite being injured himself. Amos cut a distinctive figure on the frontier. He was described as a tall, raw-boned man with dark, piercing eyes that reflected both alertness and quiet shrewdness. His black hair and weathered complexion gave him the appearance of a seasoned plainsman, equally at home among soldiers or native camps. Chapman typically wore a wide-brimmed hat and a buckskin vest decorated with fine beadwork and native designs, an outfit that spoke to his deep connection with the tribes of the southern plains. When leading wagon trains, he was often seen astride a white horse, a calm yet commanding presence on the open prairie. His grandson, Buck Chapman of Derazette, Texas, later recalled, "Grandfather was a good-hearted man who always said he had no enemies, but he was tough in a lot of ways." His skills as a hunter, tracker, and negotiator soon brought him into government service, and by the late 1860s, he was working as a scout at Forts Harker, Larned, and Dodge in Kansas. By the time of the Red River War in 1874, Chapman had already become one of the most respected scouts in Indian Territory. He had guided settlers safely through dangerous country, served under military officers on the frontier, and developed lasting ties with the Cheyenne people. Known for his quiet bravery, knowledge of the land, and ability to bridge cultures, Chapman's years on the plains prepared him for the test of his life. By the summer of 1874, tensions on the southern plains had reached a boiling point. According to Amos Chapman's granddaughter, Mrs. Ida Toller, the tribes were disgusted with the white people for what they considered violations of the Treaty of Medicine Lodge. Chiefs, Lone Wolf of the Kiowa, Quanah-Parka of the Comanche, and Little Raven of the Arapaho had all spoken for war, angered by the buffalo slaughter and broken promises, while Stonecalf of the Cheyenne still carried the memory of Custer's attack on Black Kettle's village. Though Toller's account romanticized her grandfather's role, the historical record confirms the wider truth. The Red River War was erupting across the Texas Panhandle and Indian Territory, as U.S. troops pushed south to subdue the remaining free tribes. Colonel Nelson A. Miles operated from Camp Supply, with scouts Amos Chapman and Billy Dixon, the man who made the 1,500-yard shot at a mounted Indian warrior just months prior to serving under him. Two plainsmen known for their knowledge of the terrain and tribal movements. By early September, Miles' command near McClellan Creek was running dangerously low on food and ammunition. His supply train, under Captain Willis Lyman, had not come. On September 10, 1874, Miles ordered Chapman, Dixon, and 4 cavalrymen, Sergeant Zachariah T. Woodall, and Privates Peter Rath, John Harrington, and George Smith, to carry dispatches to Camp Supply, reporting Lyman's plight and requesting reinforcements. Traveling mostly by night to avoid detection, the small party moved eastward through the prairie. But as dawn broke on the 12th of September, about 125 Kiowa and Comanche warriors, part of the same force that had been laying siege to Captain Willis Lyman's wagon, crossed their path near Gageby Creek. The 6-man detachment suddenly found itself outnumbered and exposed on open ground. What followed would become one of the most desperate and legendary small unit stands of the Red River War, known as the Battle of Buffalo Wallow. The Indians circled at a run, firing from horseback in steady rhythm. The 6-man detail found themselves in the open, with nowhere to hide. Private George Smith, set in charge of holding the horses, was hit almost immediately, shot through the chest. The panicked horses bolted, carrying off the group's food, blankets, water, and spare ammunition. In moments, the men were stranded on the prairie, surrounded and under fire from all directions, outnumbered 25-1. Harrington and Woodall were both struck. Then Chapman went down, a bullet shattering his left knee and leaving him unable to move. Only Billy Dixon remained on his feet, though slightly wounded in the calf, but still fighting as a circle of warriors tightened around them. When the gunfire eased briefly, Dixon spotted a small buffalo wallow nearby, a shallow depression in the earth, barely 10 feet across, but the only cover in sight. Made by buffalo rolling or wallowing in the dirt, this depression was just enough relief to make a difference. Dixon then broke and ran for the wallow. 3 men reached the wallow after him, and once there, the men used their knives to dig the wallow deeper, piling the loose sandy soil around the edge to form a low breastwork of cover. Smith lay where he had fallen, believed dead. Chapman, unable to walk, remained outside the depression under fire. Several times Dixon tried to get to him, but was driven back by bullets and arrows. Warriors who knew Chapman from his time living among the Cheyennes taunted him by name. "Amos, Amos, we got you now, Amos." Finally, early in the afternoon, Dixon managed to dash to Chapman, lifted him up, and carried him into the wallow through the oncoming fire. Inside that shallow pit, the surviving 5 men fought back with grim precision. Every shot counted, every cartridge mattered. They could feel the sun beating down, their mouths dry and sticky with dust and blood. Still, they sat upright whenever the Indians drew near, trying to convince the attackers they were unwounded and ready for a fight. As the hours dragged on and ammunition dwindled, Peter Rath crawled from the wallow toward Smith's fallen body, desperate to recover his cartridge belt. When he reached the body, he found, to his shock, that Smith was alive. Rath brought back the ammunition, and then he and Dixon made a second run to carry Smith in. Dixon later wrote in his memoirs that Smith's wound was hopeless. Quote, "We could see that there was no chance for him. He was shot through the left lung, and when he breathed, the wind sobbed out of his back under the shoulder blade." This is where an interesting piece of the story comes into play. Amos's granddaughter said that Amos was not hit early in the battle, that after the 5 men made it to the wallow, Amos noticed Smith's head pick up slightly, and that this is when the men realized Smith was actually alive. Amos, not Dixon and Rath, then ran out to Smith, but found trouble in lifting him up alone. According to her, he ultimately got down and put his back against Smith's chest, placing the soldier's arms around his neck. Chapman got up, but he could barely stagger under Smith. As the burdened scout hurried toward the tiny garrison, a group of 15 braves bore down on him, and that this is when the warrior shouted that "Amos, Amos, we got you now." As he turned to fire at the hostiles with his pistols, he let Smith drop, and friendly fire from the besieged friends was pumped into the Indians. Chapman fired most of his rounds before picking up the soldier and running for cover. But before he could reach the wallow, another gang came after him. With only 1 or 2 shells left, he ran for cover, amazed as he watched as a young Indian rode straight toward him. Later, Amos said, I had fed that young scoundrel 50 times, yet he almost ran me down before he fired. I fell with Smith on top of me. I felt no pain and thought I had stepped in a hole. Dixon looked askance at his scouting buddy. "Amos, you are hurt bad," he whispered. "No, I am not," insisted Amos as he helped attend the fallen Smith. But he was hurt, shot through the leg. This story was also told in a newspaper article from 1921. You'll also find that a piece of artwork by Frederick Remington, the one you are looking at right now, depicts Amos carrying the wounded Smith to the wallow. Now, I'm not trying to play revisionist historian. I am simply giving you all the information I could find. But the most common told story was the one that Amos got wounded prior to the men getting to the Buffalo Wallow, and that Rath and Dixon had retrieved Smith. Throughout the afternoon, the men held, firing carefully as the circling attackers ebbed and surged. Late in the day, a cold front rolled in from the north. Thunder cracked across the plains, and a heavy rain began to fall. Water pooled inside the wallow, soaking the wounded men to the bone. The downpour broke off the attack as the warriors withdrew into the storm. After dark, Dixon and Rath gathered tumbleweeds for bedding, and Rath tried to find help, but lost his way in the night and returned after a couple of hours. When dawn broke on the 13th of September, 1874, the battlefield was silent, the Indians gone, and the sky clear once more. Private George Smith, who had fought to breathe throughout the long night, died in the wallow as others waited for rescue. Billy Dixon, still able to walk, volunteered to find help for his wounded comrades. Less than a mile from the wallow, he spotted a column from the 8th U.S. Cavalry, 4 companies under Major William R. Price, moving across the plains in search of Colonel Miles' supply trains. Firing his rifle to get their attention, Dixon led them back to the Buffalo Wallow. Price's men had little to spare. They gave the wounded a small amount of hardtack and dried beef, but Price refused to leave guards or ammunition, explaining that his unit carried 50 caliber rifles, not the 45 caliber carbines used by the Scouts and the 6th Cavalry. He sent word to Colonel Miles and moved on, leaving the men in their muddy refuge for another day and night. It was close to midnight before help finally arrived. A detachment sent by Miles reached the wallow, bringing food, medical supplies, and wagons to carry the wounded men back to Camp Supply. Private George Smith was wrapped in an army blanket and buried in the same wallow that had sheltered his comrades. Amos Chapman, though badly wounded, insisted on riding his horse back to the post, his shattered leg strapped to the stirrup. Colonel Miles later reprimanded Major Price sharply for his failure to properly assist the wounded and assume command of his troops days later. The survivors' ordeal finally was over, but the story of their endurance on the open plains would stand among the defining moments of the Red River War. In the aftermath of the Battle of Buffalo Wallow, the story of 6 men holding out against more than 100 warriors spread quickly across the frontier. Newspapers and army reports hailed it as a symbol of courage and endurance on the open plains. Colonel Nelson A. Miles recommended all 6 participants for the Medal of Honor, and the awards were soon granted, including a posthumous medal for Private George Smith. Amos Chapman's leg was amputated above the knee at Fort Supply, but he recovered and continued to serve as a scout for years afterward, earning a reputation for toughness and quiet resolve. Billy Dixon also returned to service, scouting for the Army until 1883, while the surviving soldiers of the 6th Cavalry went back to their units. Over time, the Buffalo Wallow fight took on a legendary quality, often retold in books and frontier papers. Colonel Richard Irving Dodges, Our Wild Indians, exaggerated a few details, claiming the 6 men had killed more than 24 warriors. Chapman, however, apparently, told the mixed-blood Cheyenne, George Bent, that no Indian actually died from their gunfire, though his own granddaughter would later insist that Amos told her 35 Indians had fallen. Whatever the truth, the event's fame endured. Yet official recognition was complicated. In 1916 or 1917, Congress revoked the medals awarded to Chapman and Dixon because, as civilian scouts, they were not formally enlisted in the Army. Dixon refused to surrender his, believing it rightly earned. His medal remains today in the Panhandle Plains Historical Museum in Canyon, Texas. But in 1989, over a century later, the U.S. Army formally reinstated both scouts' honors, recognizing their gallantry. The memory of the fight was preserved not only in military records, but also in stone. In 1925, an acre of land was deeded to the Panhandle Plains Historical Society for the purpose of marking the site, and in 1927, a granite monument was erected near Gageby Creek, about 22 miles south of Canadian Texas. The marker, placed under the direction of Olive King Dixon, Billy Dixon's widow, bears the names of the 6 men and says, quote, "who cleared the way for other men." Today, the surrounding land is quiet and agricultural. Cultivated fields stretch to the north and east, while pasture and woodrows border the plot. Oil wells and storage tanks now stand in the vicinity, reminders that the once wild plains have long since been tamed. Archaeological surveys conducted in 1998 sought to locate precise traces of the fight. The land around the monument was searched with metal detectors, but only 8 spent cartridge cases were found. 3 .50 caliber Spencers, 4 .50-70 Springfields, and 1 .50 caliber Sharps, all believed to have been used by Indian combatants. If you want to dive deeper into the cartridges found, I direct you to the link down below. Click the one that says Battles of the Red River War, and it'll take you to the book. You'll have to find the Battle of Buffalo Wallow, but it gives a deep description on every detail of what they found. But most of the artifacts from the battlefield have likely been removed by collectors over the decades, yet the few that remain confirm the close range and chaotic nature of the skirmish. Though small in scale, the Buffalo Wallow fight endures as one of the most remarkable acts of survival on the Southern Plains, a story of 6 men, an open prairie, and a shallow depression in the earth that became their fortress. After the Red River War, Amos Chapman settled into a quieter but equally respected phase of his life. Wearing an artificial leg after his injury, he continued serving the U.S. government as an interpreter at Camp Supply, where his deep understanding of both native and white cultures provided invaluable. He worked to maintain peace among the Cheyenne, Arapaho, and the increasing flow of settlers and cattlemen entering Indian Territory. During the unrest of Dole Knife's flight in 1879, Chapman used his influence to calm tensions and prevent bloodshed. Later, when free-range cattlemen like James Doc Day began running herds through the reservation lands, he once again helped avert conflict, negotiating routes like the Deep Creek Trail so cattle could move safely to Kansas markets without violating tribal ground. Known for his fairness and steady temperament, Chapman earned the trust of both the Cheyenne and the U.S. Army. He had married a woman named Mary. Now, history is confusing sometimes, as y'all know. You'll see her name as Mary Longneck. You'll also find her going by a host of different Cheyenne names that I won't even try to pronounce, and that she may have been the granddaughter of the Cheyenne chief, Black Kettle, or the daughter of Sleeping Bear who was killed in the Sand Creek Massacre, or that she was the daughter of Stonecalf, another Cheyenne chief. I tried to find where the truth lies, and I only got more conflicting reports. But at the end of the day, Amos and Mary were married, and together they built a life near Siling, Oklahoma. They raised a large family, 10 children by some accounts, and blended 2 worlds under one roof. Amos taught Mary to cook in the white settlers' fashion, while she taught him the traditions and language of her people. Their grandson, Buck Chapman, remembered her fondly, calling her Nitsky, the Cheyenne word for grandmother. Quote, "Nitsky kept house like a white woman," he recalled, "and she made beaded things for me, including a beaded baseball." Many of her beadwork still survive today, displayed in the Pioneer and Indian Museum in Woodward, Oklahoma. The Cheyenne often camped on Chapman's land, where powwows and sundances were held. In his later years, Chapman retired from government work and devoted himself to ranching with Mary on their land east of Sealing. The two were said to divide matters evenly, often sleeping in a teepee on warm nights and hosting visiting Cheyenne families who came through the area. Even into old age, Chapman remained an active and independent man. But on the 18th of July, 1925, while preparing to join a lecture circuit to share stories of his frontier experiences, he was thrown from a spring wagon and fatally injured. He was buried near Sealing, where he had spent his final decades. In 1976, Amos and Mary Chapman's remains were moved from their original resting place on the family farm to a place of honor in Sealing's Brumfield Cemetery. Their graves, now marked by an historical monument bearing the emblem of the Oklahoma flag, commemorating 2 lives that symbolize both the violence and reconciliation of the frontier era. Historian Wayne Montgomery of Frontier Times called Amos one of the most able scouts on the frontier, noting that he had a way with Indians, second only to Kit Carson. No more colorful man ever rode the mountains and deserts of the West. A historical marker was placed in Sealing, Oklahoma, in Dewey County, by the Oklahoma Historical Society to honor the deeds and life of Amos Chapman. Amos Chapman's story is one of grit, endurance, and quiet heroism, a man who carried the scars of the frontier for the rest of his life. The Battle of Buffalo Wallow would define his legacy, but it did not end there. He lived the rest of his days as a bridge between 2 worlds, soldier and peacemaker, white and native, earning the respect of both. Chapman spent decades serving his community and helping keep peace where bloodshed could have easily returned. And though he died in 1925, his name lives on, etched in stone on the Texas plains, and in the stories of those who still remember what true frontier courage looked like. I hope you all enjoyed this episode on the life of Amos Chapman and the Battle of Buffalo Wallow. If you did, please like and subscribe and join the membership team. I just released a new bonus episode on the Honeywell gunfight. It's just $1. Well, $1.49 to be exact. YouTube's got to make its money. I greatly appreciate everyone's support. I can't thank you enough. We will see y'all next week, and remember, when in doubt, shoot straight, shoot fast. God bless.